The day I officially started learning how to do bobbin lace, where I only practice how to do the cross and the twist to be able to do bobbin lace, I came across one simple problem. Where do I place my pins? If you go do a deep dive, you'll discover that there are several different types of bobbin lace. I can mention 3 straight away because it's the 3 I'm quite interested: torsion, box point, and Milanese. Although I have only worked with torsion bobbin lace before, I will stick to my torsion bobbin lace. With the type of lace chosen, your first question normally will be, where do you get your patterns? Can you design your own patterns? Yes, there are several different lace patterns or lace making software out there. And the most popular one, Lace 8, unfortunately does not fit my bare minimum standards. And I will not buy an additional book to learn the software if you're either supposed to give that information for free or have a user manual that's for free, not an additional paid item. This left me with the problem of what software will I be using. When I looked at the core functioning of the software, that's to know where to have your dots and where to place your dots. I can do that in any type of image manipulation software, but the one I have access to that's got the most features will be GIMP. So knowing which software you'll be using, what type of lace you're going to make, you need to understand how to size your pattern or which size grid you will require. I'll make it simple for you. You do not need to know what size grid and how to find that grid, because today I will teach you how to create your own grid. In lace making, they speak of 2 types of straight lines and then your diagonal. The straight, the footpath. Your footpath goes down your lace, which means it's the other straight line, the one that will go across your lace, the one where you will be pinning along to add your bobbins. For that line, you will need to know a certain amount of wraps. Some people are lucky. They can get the information in advance of how many wraps per centimeter or wraps per inch. You can work with it. It's just simply you put the distance that has been measured, which will be either centimeter or inch, divided by the total amount of wraps you got within that distance. And then depending on what lace you're going to use, for me using one particular lace type, torsion bobbin lace, that will be 12 wraps, which means it's my distance of 1 centimeter divided by the amount of wraps I can get in my centimeter times my 12 wraps to get my distance. Or if you have the thread by you, you can just simply wrap your thread around a piece of paper or pencil, and you can go and wrap it 12 times around to get your 12 wraps and measure the distance it covers. And you'll be wrapping it the same way as you will if it was wraps per centimeter. Instead of the 28, 29 wraps per centimeter, you'll go for just 12 and measure your distance. With the thread I'm using, I got, for my distance of 12 wraps, I got 4 millimeters. For the size grid I need to create, for the thread I'm using, combined with the software I'm planning on using, and the angle in which I need to create my dots, I can go here to GIMP and open it up. The first thing you're going to do once you open GIMP is to create a new image, which will be, they'll ask you your canvas size. Create your canvas size, the same size as what you will require when you make your grid or the grids you need. If you do not know the size of the grids you're going to require, try and figure out what it is you want to make and combine that and use that item's measurement to create your grid. With your canvas at the correct size, I'll advise you to have at least 3 different layers. Your background layer to help you see where more or less your dots are, because working with a transparent background does not work as well. Then you're going to have your temporary layer, which is focused on aiding you when it comes to creating your grid. Your last layer will be the layer you're going to use to manipulate to create your grid. And yes, I promise you're going to manipulate it so well. An A4 piece of paper, grid size, you will have done in roughly 10 minutes. For this quick and easy method of creating a grid, we'll start on a temporary layer. Ideally start in one corner, and in GIMP I can choose a selection of a square and what size I want my square to be in. This is important because if you can recall correctly, I already mentioned my distance for 12 wraps of 4 millimeters. I will be creating my square as a square as 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters. Here I will advise to have your square at least in some other color so that you can go and create your dot on top of that square, which you can see. We will start with the first 4 dots, the 4 corners of our square, and technically it won't be a simple square. I will normally go and put my first dot inside the square at the top left corner, then go to the right top corner and just outside this square where your dot will meet the edge of the square, your second dot. Then go to your bottom left corner, again like the top right, just outside the square against your square side. Make your dot. And then if you can by some miracle mentally track 2 lines from the top right and the bottom left to where the bottom right dot needs to get, because I prefer to work with squares only and my brush being square, that will mean my top left corner of my brush need to meet the bottom right corner of my square, and your 4 dots will be on the grid page or the grid layer. Then going back to your temporary layer, you'll create an X with the 4 dots to get the center of this particular square. For those that are a bit confusing, that will be the top left to bottom right, top right to bottom left. On your grid layer, you put a pin dot where you see the lines crossed in the center. Now that the temporary layer has done its job, you can go and delete it. Your grid layer, which is supposed to have 5 dots on now, you can go and crop your layer to the content of your layer, which means to be the 5 dots, where it will only do the 5 dots. If you went and you decided to put your square and where you start your grid on a random location, now would be ideal to move it into position at the top left hand side of your pattern or your grid. Now for my secret sneaky trick for how to take a half-day grid making session down to less than 10 minutes. Duplicate your grid layer. Move the grid with the top layer of the 2 grid layers. Left-hand side dots correspond and cover perfectly the bottom layer's right-hand side dots. And then go and merge your 2 layers. Then repeat the duplication of the layer, moving the layer to where the dots meet up properly and merge it down. These steps you're going to repeat across the vertical side of your pattern or grid. With the last duplication, you will find that you'll have multiple dots not fitting in correctly. Here I will do it simply. Ensure that the dots are within the borders of my grid. Then I will tweak the position of the top layer that it fully match up with the bottom layer and merge down. Then we're going to repeat those steps of duplicating the layer, moving the layer and merging it down like we did for the vertical, the same to the horizontal. Those exact steps, where the amount of times you have to repeat it will differ. By now you have completed your grid. Ensure that the dots of your grid are all on one layer. You have your background layer and you are ready to create a layer for your pattern. If you ever looked at more or less how the patterns look, you'll find most of there are different symbols on your pattern. That means for different stitches. I'll run them quickly by you. You have your half stitch and full stitch, where you have a single dot of where you're going to place it. Your cloth stitch will go between two sets of pins, which is not next to one another. Where your cloth stitch will be, you'll have a zigzag from the one pin across to the other end of the cloth stitch, going back to the first side and creating a zigzag all the way to where the cloth stitch ends. Then you have your pleats, which normally will be just a straight line if it is indicated within a pattern. Rose ground will have a diamond between 4 sets of pins. A honeycomb will go straight down. You get your pass of pairs, which will be a straight line between 2 sets of pins next to one another. A gimp will be that odd thicker line creating shapes within your pattern. Tally's got 2 different symbols depending on which one you're using. You can use a square tally, which some will call it a cucumber, and that will be your square on your pattern. Now for the leaf shape, which is your pointed oval, that will start at the thin point going out and end with a thin point. Then you get your spiders, and the amount of spiders and types of spiders you get, each and every one of them have their own unique image. But the basic standard spider will have 2 legs going from the outside to a center point, then going back out. In total, that would be 8 lines within that particular square. Now here's the question: what type of person will I be if I don't demonstrate how to use this grid, since it's easily and quickly created, and how to create your own pattern on this app too? Probably not a good one. So I'll start with the pattern I have chosen, or technically my inspiration. For somebody that enjoys doing a craft with another person in the room, crafting, and currently I'm busy working on a ball gown which I will be hand sewing, where one of my 6 layers will have bobbin lace insert. So I end up looking for people busy with a typical bobbin lace pattern, showing you where you can follow along but not really pay attention. That is where I came across the person who streams bobbin lace, Liz Kimber. I have found her streaming an entire project, curtains to be exact. This is a large pattern and project, and she simply streaming the entire process. But the more I looked at her work, the more I got a slight problem with the pattern. I want my symmetry. I don't want to see where one thing have a 5x5 rose ground stitch grouping, and then at the other area a different how many rose grounds there are. It started to drive me insane. I wanted a set pattern that doesn't alter. And also, I am limited to creating only lace strips at this moment. Sad and not happy about it, because she's using squares. I can only do strips. But wait, if I do strips, my main issue with her square pattern, which will be the way she have to turn the corners, that will be fixed for me. I'm not having anything against her. Her pattern is gorgeous. That is why I was so inspired by it. With a proper study of more or less how her pattern is actually designed, I came up with my own pattern, which is literally her pattern in a strip form. The base strip will be 11 dots long, and to figure out how wide, I will have to create the actual pattern. But again, working smarter, not harder. Choosing lazy options is a way I will be going with this as well. First up will be the ground layer, which will have a zigzag triangle. Once I have multiple repeats, it's basically a triangle scallop, to have a zigzag cloth stitch down. Okay, that I can do. And I will be using different colors to help me identify the different patterns or sections of my pattern. Then it's my rose ground. Simple, can be easily done. And then we go on onto the cloth stitch and then the ground stitch with my cutting corners wherever I can to increase the time that I do not have to spend creating. I will stop midway and crop that particular layer to all my dots and then flip it over that it's the mirror image. Move it into place and merge my layers. If there's any tiny or any dots now not accounted for, I will quickly put them in. Then all you have to do, if you have one repeat and you want your entire grid length to have your entire piece, like I will be using my infinity pillar, I need it to be a certain length. I will copy each layer of the repeat in my pattern and move it down so it can fill in my entire grid length. Now here's what I'm going to advise if you are unlucky, meaning if you have to go and figure out where to place your next set of dots or what to do with some dots missing, go and figure out how you can adjust your layers of your repeat and how can you fill in your panels which is not accounted for. So it can look like you have chosen to create it in this way instead of having to fix it. With my earlier attempts of miscalculating and not measuring correctly, I have gotten a piece where I had to use a 6mm grid instead of using a 4mm grid. And this threw me out. Where I went and I moved my repeats of this particular pattern, that it had a shorter row. This particular pattern was 7 pins wide. It will be those rows that got 6 pins in it. I had to fill in. Not a big deal. Now it looks like that's the pattern I went with. If you have done your pattern and you are ready, eager to get started, and all you want to do is export it, print your pattern, and start pricking just a bit slow down. Like when we started, we had to prep and prime to be able to create our patterns and our grids. We now have to prep for our exporting. GIMP got a wonderful feature, depending on what your size is. Because if you go with an image that are smaller than your allowed printable page size for your printer, you don't have to worry too much about this particular step. But if you're like Liz, who wants to do a pattern, you're going to have a slight issue. Your grid and your pattern will be a lot bigger than the pattern you can print based on the size of paper you have. This technically is not a problem in GIMP. Simply create another temporary layer of the actual page size. And then go and move your page or that block to the top left-hand side corner and create a guide at the end of that page, your page size square or block. Almost like the way you had to do the creating your grid with duplicating and moving. We'll just move to the next section, other side of your guide, and place a guide there. Doing that for the vertical and horizontal of the page. Then under image, you can get a simple, making your life easy, a section that's basically split image at guidelines. Unfortunately, I don't know what setting to use to have it to create layers, but when I tried it, it gave me multiple windows to work from. You can either choose to throw each layer onto one document to print it as a PDF, or save each and every image, or actually, since we're using GIMP, it's to export each and every section of your pattern. With everything prepped and primed, you can now go and simply print your pattern. One of the problems I have discovered, and would advise to limit the amount of pages you print in the beginning to get your settings correctly, is to actually go and measure after one page print the distance between your two dots, to see if your grid is the correct size as your pattern. Once you have the correct size and settings to print your pattern without a problem, print it. Since I tend to keep my patterns up until now and at the soon foreseeable future smaller than an A4. The step people will do if they have larger pages, patterns will be to paste and sticking the pages together that you're creating your grid back to its actual size after printing. If you can laminate it, I'll advise to laminate so that you can keep your pattern for a lot longer. If you cannot keep it for long, I will go with something like DC Fix to put a particular layer on. And then a longer step yet. And anybody that knows how to do bobbin lace will agree. Up until this point, it was easy and straightforward, and quite quickly to do. Time to do that pricking. If you have a small pattern, the pricking will be over quickly. Or the larger your pattern will be, the longer it will take you to do the pricking. Then you can set up your lace and your pillow and prep your bobbins and test out your new pattern. But like I said earlier, I am currently working on a different set of patterns that are for a different project altogether. My curtain pattern and making of my curtain will have to wait, unfortunately, until next week.